Hi, my name is Monique Swart. I'm the founder of the African Business Travel Association. And today we're going to go through a couple of key challenges that corporates have when sending their travelers into Africa. And we're not just going to look at the difficult bits, we'll also look at some solutions that we suggest going in line against those challenges. So some of the different things that we're going to go through is, first of all, just general education about different African countries that we're sending travelers into, having access to informed information, being able to make informed decisions, and so on. We're going to look at suppliers and some key challenges with local air and hotel partners based on the African continent. We're going to look at all things money, some challenges, and I know this is one of the key things that a lot of our members struggle with, is some of the key challenges around money, payment options, forex, and things like that. We're going to look at traveller safety and security and duty of care and how to deal with some of those challenges on the continent. And then also looking at differentiation, specifically within the TMC travel agency space and dealing with suppliers on the continent from a TMC perspective. So starting off looking at education, I think one of the key things that we're seeing, which is quite a big frustration for us, is that a lot of travel managers and travel consultants who are sending travelers onto the African continent have actually never traveled into the countries that they're sending travelers into. And this for me is one of the key challenges, because until you've actually been in a country, until you've been on the ground, until you've been at the airport, until you've been struggling through traffic, you really don't know as a traveler what it is that they experience. Some of the key elements that I think are so important for people to understand is things around airport knowledge. So customs, passport control, things like making sure you wrap your bags. I can't tell you how many times before I knew better, when I would land in different African countries, Nigeria specifically in the rainy season, your bag comes out and when you get it on the other side, it is literally soaking through. So wrapping it more from keeping your goods dry perspective than actually keeping them safe sometimes. And then just general things like the airport layout, what they can expect when they're coming through, where they need to look for their transfer drivers and things like that, is something that a lot of travelers, especially first-time travelers, really struggle with, because it can be quite overwhelming as a first-time experience. And then things like traffic and geography. We have people booking meetings and booking hotels and doing all sorts of interesting things for their travelers and not actually understanding the layout of the land of the country that this traveler is in. So what could look like a 20-minute trip on Google Maps in a city like Lagos in rush hour traffic could take you 4 hours. So trying to understand where the lay of the land is, where the hotels are in relation to different businesses, and where client meetings and things like that might take place is really important as well. And then that also feeds into trip ROI. So if your traveler is spending a lot of wasted time traveling backwards and forwards on the road and with traffic and things like that, that can be a key problem, and a lot of time can be wasted. So one of the key things that we suggest for companies is to try and make sure that their travelers have their meetings at their actual hotels or wherever it is that they're staying. To try and have a traveler having 4 or 5 business meetings in a day in a city like Lagos and driving around is really, really difficult to achieve. I would say if you can squeeze 3 in with the traffic, it's quite a lot. So trying to make sure that they are as efficient as possible, make sure their meetings are booked actually at the office where they are staying, at the hotel where they're staying. And then looking at things like hotels and the transfer providers that you use and so on. And we're going to get into this a little bit more in a couple of the other slides. But I can guarantee you that what you see online is often not what you get. So to be able to actually visit the country yourself as a travel manager or as a TMC travel consultant or travel coordinator and experience the service that you get, and there's some amazing service providers, don't get me wrong, there's amazing service providers all across the continent, but making sure that you actually experience it in person before you ask your travelers to experience it can often be a really, really good thing to do. Then looking at safety, and this is one of my key kind of bugbears as well, is that I'll tell people I'm going to Angola or I'm going to Kenya or Nigeria or wherever it is, and they're like, oh, do you feel safe? Do you have armed transfers? Do you have bodyguards accompanying you? And the truth is, when I started out, I did, because I thought I needed that. I used to go with one of the big corporates in South Africa. We used to go together into Nigeria. And we had secure transfers and we had blue light convoys and all sorts of things. But the truth is that unless you are a real big wig at an oil and gas company, the level of threat just isn't that great. And you obviously need to be aware, you obviously need to make sure whoever is picking you up has been pre-arranged, that you know who your transfer providers are and things like that. But honestly, to have too much security sometimes is going to end up having you be more obvious and draw attention to yourself than if you just do a normal transfer like a lot of the other business travelers do. Okay, and then looking at global mandates is also quite a key thing. So we often hear companies in South Africa struggling because globally what's mandated for their travel program as far as what kind of suppliers to use or what payment systems to use, what credit cards to make use of, etc., is kind of filtered down globally from the UK or the US office, and often it's not applicable on the African continent. Often a lot of those things just can't happen. But when you have your travelers telling you that, it can sometimes be a little bit difficult to feed that back into the people that need to know in the UK or the US. But as a travel manager or a travel consultant, actually experiencing it for yourself, again, to me is really, really important. And then lastly, visa processes and things like getting through passport control. So I was recently traveling to Angola and went through the entire visa process. And quite a few of my local colleagues in Angola said to me, don't do that. South Africans don't need visas anymore. That is true for tourists. And you'll find this with a lot of countries is that they've relaxed their visa requirements, but from a tourist perspective. So initially when that happens, a lot of business travelers will go in on those tourism visas and they won't really have many issues with that. But after a while, countries can start clamping down on that. And we had a colleague in Namibia a few years ago who went in on a tourism visa when she was actually there for a conference, and she was stopped and she wasn't allowed access. So making sure that you are up to date and well aware of what visa requirements are, and not taking chances even if it seems easier at the time. So a couple of key solutions for me to these challenges is for travel managers and travel consultants to try wherever possible to go and visit these countries directly. Now, I know that we're busy, I know it's difficult to get out of the office as a travel manager, but the few times that we have had familiarization trips where we've taken some of our members into these different countries, I cannot tell you the feedback we get as to the amount of value they get out of it and how they actually, for the first time, understand from the traveler's perspective what it is to travel in these countries. And even for travel management companies who, we often hear TMC saying, if we send one consultant, we need to send all of them. And I think that's really a bit of a short-sighted attitude to have. If you have different consultants, all who specialize in a specific country, so you send one consultant to Nigeria and everything that then comes through Nigeria goes through that expert because she has on-the-ground knowledge. You can do the same thing for Kenya and Ivory Coast and Egypt and you name it, wherever your clients are traveling to, have those country experts in place through your consultants. And then ensuring a good network of local partners. So if you are not able to be there yourself or go and visit the country, making sure, and again, it's better to be able to meet these people face to face, but trying to make sure that you have a really good local network. Sometimes to rely again on South African service providers to help you with a challenge that you might have in Nairobi can be a challenge. You want local people with local knowledge that can help you and support you, especially if things go wrong. And then making sure that you use as up-to-date as possible online resources. So again, trying to find a good hotel on Google. If you go into the hotel site directly, sometimes they're going to tell you what they think you want to hear. So if you're using peer-to-peer types of sites to check out accommodation providers and so on, try and make sure they're sites like TripAdvisor, where they're up to date and they're going to give you good information on what you're looking for. And then ABTA is also launching our virtual fam trips Know Africa, Know as in K-N-O-W, not no. Our virtual fam trips website, where again you can download a lot of great corporate travel specific information on each of those different countries across the African continent. And then the last thing is to try and make sure as much as possible that travelers are well prepared. Again, it's great to be able to give them your first-hand knowledge of when you traveled, what you experienced. Even things like in Lagos, you can't have a trolley without paying, I think it's something like 100 naira, which is nothing. But if you don't have a 100 naira note and you've got 5 bags, you're going to be lugging them and dragging them to the transfer car as opposed to being able to use a trolley. So little things like that that just really help from a traveler's perspective. Okay, and then looking at hotels and airlines, obviously we know that some of the key challenges within the African continent is that there is really a limited frequency with a lot of flight frequency challenges. And accommodation providers as well, especially in the more remote regions, you're going to find a lack of accommodation providers, which can be a challenge. And when you are sending travelers into those top global hotel name brands because you believe they would be most reputable and most like their global counterparts, you're going to pay top dollar. So that's a key thing to look at as well. Remote regions, often what we're seeing more and more is that companies are starting to look at alternatives. So if there isn't a hotel and your best bet is a guest house or a B&B, 50 kilometers away from the mine that your guys are visiting or whatever it is, we're seeing more and more, depending on the frequency of travel, that companies are actually starting to go with the whole concept of build versus buy. So if we have a lot of travel into a region and we can't get the accommodation right that we need, especially from a safety and security perspective, you've got more corporate housing kind of developments popping up where guys are actually taking charge of their own accommodation in that way. And again, what you see on Google is often not what you get. So some of the key things that you want to look at when booking hotels and flights, specifically again in these kind of remote regions, is that preparation is key. The more lastminute.com your travelers are, the more lastminute.com your bookings are, the more your options get less and less and less. And so you find yourself, potentially choosing a supply that you may not have chosen before because you don't have another option. And that can be a key challenge sometimes, again, especially from a safety perspective. And then try to understand as well different routes and traveler preferences. I was speaking to a South African traveler in Lagos at the airport a while back, and he was flying directly home from Lagos. And he was saying, he much prefers to fly an indirect route because the indirect route takes him to an airport where he can do some good shopping and make up for the fact that he's been away from his family. And even though it's 5 hours longer, he still gets to be productive because this other airport has got, free Wi-Fi throughout the airport. So sometimes weigh up those pros and cons of costs versus how long it's going to take. Sometimes direct is better, sometimes direct isn't better. So really trying to make sure you profile your travelers and do some traveler feedback and traveler surveys to see what it is that they want, because it might surprise you sometimes. And then looking at researching different accommodation options. A lot of times people think the big global hotel brands are the best way to go, and often they are definitely the most reputable, best service levels, etc., etc. But from a security perspective, sometimes companies want to try and stay away from the big names, the names that are hosting the G8 summit and World Cup presidency and his crew. So think about that from a security perspective as well. And then also, definitely when using the top brands, especially in regions where supply is far higher than, or demand is far higher than supply, Luanda is a good example of this in Angola. Be prepared for really, really heavy hotel bills. When there aren't that many options in the region that you're looking for the hotel, wherever your meetings, etc. are happening, you're going to be paying top dollar in comparison to local prices. Okay, and then moving on to all things money. So we know that credit card acceptance obviously can be a challenge in a lot of emerging markets, but I think sometimes people make assumptions about that aren't necessarily accurate. And so, just to say credit cards aren't accepted in Africa, that's not accurate at all. Most big brands, a lot of hotels, restaurants, all sorts of different vendors that actually do take credit cards. And then something that a lot of people are concerned about in Africa is fraud when traveling with credit cards. And we actually did a survey a while back, and basically what came out of that survey is that the fear of fraud is far greater than the actual instances of fraud themselves. Remembering also that banks, you're insured against fraud. So if you're excuse is using cash because you worry that something's going to happen when using a credit card, I would suggest relooking that, because cash can be a lot more difficult to track. Cash is still king in a lot of the markets, but trackability is really, really difficult, because you're going to find little bits and pieces of cash being given out here, there, and everywhere. And when somebody gets back from a trip, to try and actually remember where all of that cash went can sometimes be difficult. We also often have travelers saying that they're not going to worry too much about organizing Forex before they land. They'll just draw Forex at an ATM. You can do that, but ATMs don't always work. I've had exactly the same ATM in exactly the same airport that's worked 2 or 3 times in a row, Nairobi specifically, and then on my 3rd or 4th trip I try and it doesn't work, and then you're stuck without cash. So waiting until you're actually in country to sort out your Forex is not often a good idea as well. And then different Forex regulations. There are more and more regulations in different countries. Again, Angola's a key one recently, where paying in US dollars now is actually illegal. So sending travelers into the African continent and just saying, here's a wad of dollars, go knock yourselves out, is a challenge, because in those countries where they can't use dollars, they can't use dollars. And then looking at taking money out of a country as well, is make sure that you know what kind of limits people are allowed to take out. There are some very, very strict regulations as to how much cash you're allowed to take out of different African countries. And then also, from a South African perspective, if you have per diems for your travelers, there are tax requirements on per diems from SARS, so you need to check those out as well. So a couple of just quick suggestions is try and make sure you research who does accept credit cards and prepay wherever you can. Limit the cash given to travelers, first of all from a safety perspective, and also from a wastage perspective. You don't want travelers coming back with wads and wads of Naira or Kwanza, and there's nowhere in South Africa that you can change them. So then, those bills sit waiting for the next trip. And make sure you've got some kind of process in place where you can reuse that excess money, but obviously watch currency fluctuations, because if you're reusing it a year later, or using that money brought back from a previous trip a year later, you could be losing on a lot of Forex. And then looking at security, I think one of our key challenges with safety and security from a South African or African mindset in general is that attitude of we'll be fine. And people just not taking it seriously enough. So I think traveler education is really important. First-time travelers versus frequent travelers both need their own sets of education. Frequent travelers often can be the ones that get complacent. So as much as they think they know exactly what they're doing and they're the safest ones, that sometimes is not the case. And obviously first-time travelers need a bit of special care as well when it comes to preparing them. I find a lot of companies either have too little safety, they just don't even think about it. They might slap some travel insurance onto your trip, the day before you leave, or there's too much. Again, like I said before, with these convoys and the blue light brigades, and it's just sometimes not necessary. So finding out from local colleagues what they suggest and what is required. Definitely at a bare minimum, making sure who's fetching you from the airport and where they're taking you to, and that wherever you're staying is safe, I would say is a requirement. But these big armed guards sometimes are a little bit overkill. And then making sure your travelers know when they go off-piste, when they decide, okay, well, I'm booked in at this hotel, but I'm rather going to stay at that one, just what those challenges are if you're trying to get hold of them, and making sure they're okay when something bad happens. So just really the importance of finding the balance between overkill as far as safety, making sure your travelers are educated, making sure that they're checking in regularly when they're traveling, and that you've got some kind of system in place where you can track them. Travel insurance as a bare minimum, and then if you think it's necessary, making sure that you partner with some security providers that specialize in security on the continent. And then our last slide is looking at differentiation between TMCs and travel agents on the African continent. So we find that a lot of local companies, and even UK and US based companies, are partnering with local travel agents in different African countries. And sometimes those local agents are franchises from a global agency, but often global isn't actually global, because a lot of times these guys aren't getting the training that they need. They don't understand the corporate travel industry well, and they don't have any differentiation between leisure travel and corporate travel. They think because they book travel for holidaymakers and they book travel for corporates, that means that they serve as corporate accounts. Again, there's a lot of amazing TMCs across the African continent, a lot of global brands, also a lot of independents that have done their research, they understand travel policy, they know the importance of data and information and duty of care, and they do really, really great jobs. But for the most part, there are a lot of travel agencies out there that are not yet travel management companies. And so utilizing guys like that, you're going to find is a struggle when you're looking for data and trying to make sure your travelers are being looked after and things like that. So again, do your homework, try and meet any partners that you establish face to face. And sometimes if you can't get the service levels you're looking for, you might need to train them up yourself, and that's something to think about. You know, we had one of our big members many years ago when they launched into one of the developing African countries. They actually went in and they established the TMC themselves. They trained these guys from the ground up as to how their travel program works, and really did a lot to boost the industry in doing that. So something to think about as well if you've got partners in place and you just can't seem to get the service levels where you want them. And that is about it. So I hope you enjoyed that. That was going through quite quickly, but please feel free to ask me any questions if you have any. And yeah, thank you very much.